The world is in chaos. This system of things is disintegrating. The world economy, health systems, security, governments, and we know where this all is leading. It is leading to the Great Tribulation. Have you ever asked yourself, do I have enough faith to face these fear-inspiring events with the joy of Jehovah? Well, we can learn much from the example of Habakkuk. He lived in a similar time. Jehovah inspired him to give this prophecy about 20 years before the destruction of Jerusalem in 607 BCE. Our daily text comments highlight 3 lessons we can learn from the book of Habakkuk. It says there, never stop praying, listen to what Jehovah tells us through his word and organization, and patiently wait on Jehovah. So let us take those 3 points and discuss them briefly. The first one, never stop praying. Habakkuk in chapters 1 and 2 is engaged in a dialogue with Jehovah God. And if we look here in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, he's asking Jehovah very intensely, why do you allow violence, wrongdoing, oppression, injustice? It concerned him very much. Then Jehovah answered Habakkuk from verse 5 through 11. And Jehovah says something very interesting in verse 5. He says, something will happen in your days that you will not believe even if it is told to you. For here I am raising up the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. So Jehovah was going to bring Babylon to bring judgment and punishment on the evildoers. So Jehovah answered his prayer. We also are affected by injustice, are we not? A brother here at Bethel recently told me that he was watching a news program and the reporter was explaining all the obvious and terrible injustices that were happening. He said, it got me very tense. I had to shut the television off. But then he said, I talked to Jehovah. Afterwards, he said, I calmed right down and my confidence returned. So prayer is very important. It puts us in the right frame of mind. But it doesn't end there. We need to go to the next step, that of listening to what Jehovah tells us through his word and his organization. Now we can take the example from Habakkuk in chapter 2. He helps us to see a procedure, a process, or an approach that he took. First, in Habakkuk 2 verse 1, he says, at my guard post I will keep standing, and I will station myself on the rampart. Then he says, I will keep watch to see what he will speak by means of me, and what I will reply when I'm reproved. Do you see the 2 things he was doing? He was keeping standing, and the next thing, he was keeping watching. So keep standing, in this particular case, he says he will station himself on the rampart. Now a rampart is, in those days, it could often have been a wall around the city, a huge, strong wall. So in other words, he was keeping himself in a position of safety, first of all. And then secondly, he watched to see, he listened to what Jehovah was telling him. Now, as you know, listening has 2 components. The one part is hearing, getting the sense of it, and the second part is acting upon it. So here Jehovah was speaking to Habakkuk. In verse 2, Jehovah answered him. And Jehovah said, write down the vision and inscribe it clearly on tablets, so that the one reading aloud from it may do so easily. Very interesting that Jehovah gives him an assignment to write this down, but Jehovah also reveals that he had in mind for someone to read it aloud, to spread his message to others. So we can follow that example of Habakkuk. First of all, place ourselves under Jehovah's protection, on our rampart, as it were, under the mighty hand of God. Don't leave that safe place. And then secondly, listen. Be ready to respond to whatever Jehovah tells us to do. So how do we stay in our place? Well, we stay focused on our assignment. We have work to do. We must preach and teach and do our part in the Christian congregation. And we listen by being very carefully attuned to God's organization, the leading we receive from God's organization. We cannot anticipate what is going to happen next. Take, for instance, with this pandemic. Who of us expected that? But look how beautifully Jehovah's people, his organization, led us through these very difficult times. This now brings us to the third aspect, patiently wait. The reality is matters are going to get far worse than they are now. And we shouldn't be surprised if our reaction is the same as that of Habakkuk when he started anticipating what was coming. Let us read Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 16. He says, I heard and I trembled within. At the sound my lips quivered, my legs beneath me were shaking. But then, he says, the second part of verse 16, but I quietly wait for the day of distress. That reaction is not lack of faith, but quietly wait is evidence of true faith. Now, Habakkuk was not naive. He knew what was coming. He describes here in verse 17, the fig tree may not blossom, no fruit on the vines, the olive crop may fail, the fields may produce no food. So food may run short, property may be lost, standards of living may go down. But the question is, how will we respond? What will be our reaction? Will we quietly wait and patiently, calmly accept whatever happens, even if the sequence of events are not exactly what we expect them to be? So what's the lesson? The lesson is in Habakkuk 2, verse 3. Jehovah has an appointed time. He says the vision is for the appointed time. Keep in expectation of it. It will not be late. So what matters is not when the end will come, how the end will come, but that we live a life of faith doing Jehovah's will. So back to the question, do I have enough faith to go through the upcoming fear-inspiring events and keep my joy? Absolutely. Habakkuk 3 verse 18, he ends the chapter, he says, but as for me, I will exult in Jehovah, I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. So what's the bottom line? Pray, listen, and wait patiently.